Welcome to another edition of the Willy Bragg Show. Today, our guest will be Keaton Weiss from Due Dissidence. Even though I do know, I can assume everybody know who you are. Just in case there's somebody who's never heard of you guys, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, no, it's good to see you again, Willie. Always a pleasure
Right.
talking to you, and thanks for the invite. Um, yeah, back from the road in New Hampshire. Been talking about that quite a bit, so yeah, looking forward to it, man.
Oh, absolutely, and I like what you guys do when y'all actually get out into the public, asking questions and talking to various people. Like for example, last year the where Russell went and kind of trolled the shit lives. That's probably one of my favorite videos all year.
Oh yeah, you're talking about outside the Trump arraignment in New York
Yeah,
with the
absolutely.
cowbell guys. Yeah, yeah, that
Oh
was a
my
fun one.
god, they were so cringe. I watched that video. I showed that video actually to most people introducing potential fans to do this, and I always show that video to a lot of my normie friends to show you how some of the shit lives act and everything, and how I as a leftist do not identify with the shit live mentality.
Well, we had when we did that, we had a bunch of footage. Russell got a bunch of footage that we played on our YouTube show, but then I tweeted out the thing with the cowbell guys, and that got like almost 400,000 views. That went semi-viral. And I had other stuff that like we could have tweeted out, but we just kind of felt like anything else that we tweeted out would just be inferior to that. So we saved the rest for our YouTube show. So that was like the only big thing that we tweeted out, but there is more that's in the YouTube version of that.
I'll let to look at it at some point. And what you did is prior to the New Hampshire primary day, the weekend prior. I mean, just it illustrates everything that I detest about the candidate, Nikki Haley, who when I explain to a lot of my leftist friends, even my normie friends, when it comes to Trump, I said I would never vote for the man. I would never support him in any way, shape, or form. But there are a lot of Republicans a hell of a lot worse than Trump could ever be. And DeSantis, in my opinion, and Haley, in my opinion, are worse than Trump.
Well, sure. I mean, DeSantis and Haley represent that sort of Bush era neocon vision. DeSantis never really embraced that, but never really disavowed it either. He just kind of punted on that issue and hoped he could ride people's like resentment at Mickey Mouse into the White House. Like he just kind of ran this anti woke campaign, never bothered broadening the message out to anything else, and never really took a position on Ukraine. Never took much of a position on Israel either. And Haley, obviously, even worse than that, she really represents just a full throated embrace of the George W. Bush Republican Party, which was actual fascism. I mean, the Trump version of that is sort of like a cartoon fascism, right? With the face paint and the shitting on the walls of the Capitol and stealing the lectern and stuff. Like it's an over the top comic strip version of what a fascist movement is. But the Bush years was, those were actual. That was an actual fascist era, and that's what Nikki Haley really represents. And so, yeah, I mean, I think she is far scarier than Trump. And luckily, she's not going to get anywhere near the nomination. As part of
Well,
it.
as a socialist, and I've been criticized by some people years ago from the more hard left that I focus too much on issues of civil liberties, and I'm a staunch civil libertarian. It's part of my bargain being a leftist from day one, which is why free speech absolutism and things like that. More like an old school ACLU type. That's
Right.
kind of my vision. Unfortunately, they fallen on the wayside. Still do good work, but they're not as impressive as they used to be. The civil liberties have really been going down the toilet since Bush and Cheney, and each president finds new ways to encroach on our civil liberties, and just Biden's no any different from what George W. Bush and Dick Cheney offered, nor Obama or Trump.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was the new bargain. I mean, this is the new American century that they outlined in that document, after the fall of the wall and after the end of the Cold War, we had reached this sort of end of history period. That was the famous book by Francis Fukuyama called that the end of history, meaning the end of any debate about which political and economic systems were ideal for human prosperity and well-being. The idea at that time was that this sort of hybrid of market capitalism and representative democracy was the way to go. There would never be any sort of questioning of that, and that we had reached a sort of endpoint, an endpoint where there would be no more conflict, no more debate, no more struggle about how to order social and economic systems. But obviously, that was not to last. That vision was not long for the world. And so this new American century has been defined by war overseas and, as you just said, an erosion of civil liberties here at home. To a certain extent, albeit a small one, but to a certain extent, Trump was a reversal of that. He didn't start any new wars, right? His encroachment on civil liberties paled in comparison to George W. Bush and even Barack Obama. And so that is my theory as to why they are so determined to keep him out of the White House again. Now, don't confuse that with an endorsement of Trump. It certainly is not. But they are against him for all the wrong reasons, not for the right ones.
They're against him for the mean tweets and all of that. And Glenn Greenwald said in one interview that the reason why he more or less basically said we were accidentally less aggressive during the Trump years because of the chaos that ensued basically between the Trump loyalists, the neocon leaning never Trumpers, and the shit live leaning resistance. He didn't say it in those words, but that's basically what he said. Translation. And there was a lot of dysfunctionality that was going on. And, and I just thought about it, that's what it was meant by no new wars. I mean, he was by no means a peacenik, but on a few things, he was trying to get us out of Syria, and he ordered them out of his troops out of Syria, and the generals ignored him.
And the media went after him for that. And, there was a clip that I saw it circulating last night. I don't know how recent this is, but he was talking about Israel, and he said, look, I'll be happy when they're happy. Meaning, if they agree on a 2-state solution, I'll be happy with that. If they agree on a 1-state solution, I'll be happy with that. I just want both parties to be happy so that people stop getting killed, right? And, that's kind of where he comes from. Right. I think it's where he comes from, not as a humanitarian, but as a business person. Right. Conflict is bad for business. He sees it as wasteful. He sees it as a waste of blood, a waste of money. He's said those things when he's spoken on the campaign trail, even this time. And so I think that is where he is coming from. And I think that he probably overestimated the extent to which, just like Obama overestimated the extent to which he could sort of bring the forces of Washington to heel, right? Obama thought he was going to come in and all of a sudden left and right would unite and we'd have this big kumbaya moment. Whereas I think Trump just thought he could overpower all that. I think he thought that he's going to be the boss. He's going to run the country like he ran the Trump organization, and that he would just be able to, through power of personality, through power of presence, and to a certain extent through the power of like a mass political movement that he rode in on, overpower that. And just like Obama, he wasn't able to. He was able to slow things down to such an extent that the powers that be don't want him anywhere near the White House ever again. But he wasn't able to run things exactly his way. No one is. And, the presidency attracts these big personalities, right? That's how they have the ego that takes to run for president in the first place. It's how they win, right? They usually have these magnetic personalities that draw people to them. And with those come giant egos and a very inflated sense of like what they are going to be able to do. A very inflated sense of like the level of control they're going to be able to exert over the system. I think Obama felt that. I think Trump felt that. Biden is sort of different in that way because Biden strikes me as just a lifelong company man. You know, he's been in Washington since 1972. He's been there 50 years now. I think he knows that no one person can exert the kind of influence that a lot of these, like, you know, other sort of more dynamic types think they can. And that makes Biden even more dangerous in a certain sense because he doesn't bring any human element to any of the decisions that come out of his White House. He is just an empty vessel for the most nefarious forces that this empire knows. That's why you have, like, nobody believes Joe Biden is running things now. Foreign policy is run by Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken. Economic policy is run by Janet Yellen, right? These are the unelected sort of functionaries that usually run things behind the scenes. But in the case of Obama and Trump, Bill Clinton, they stay behind the scenes because Obama and Trump are these big dynamic figures. They function as figureheads. So people don't look at Antony Blinken, Janet Yellen, Jake Sullivan under President Obama or President Trump. They look at Obama, they look at Trump because those are superstars. Joe Biden is not a superstar. So you see right through him. You see right through him to all of these goons in back of him that are just running the world into hell at a very, very fast pace.
Absolutely. And you know, the one thing I would say Trump has done is rip the mask out of this ugly system where, you know, where it was everybody was tone policing each other, and it was just a lot of bullshit that was going on. The bullshit continues and all of that. And you're right about the dynamic personalities or somebody who's like ostensibly against the system or gives that appearance. Because I think that if Bernie Sanders would have won, I think there would have been a real life version of a novel called. Have you ever heard of Every British Coup by Chris Mullins?
I have not heard of that. No.
Yeah, it came out in the early '80s, and they did a PBS Masterpiece Theater series on it in the early '90s here, and it was basically about in the fictional year 1989 when Margaret Thatcher was defeated by Harry Perkins, and Harry Perkins was a younger man, but really the book was about a Michael Foot government, a radical socialist government elected in the UK, and the CIA, MI5, the right-wing press, and even some turncoats inside the Labour Party trying to bring down the Perkins government. I think that would have happened to Bernie had he won the presidency.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. It's just so far from what you know, in retrospect, it just seems so, it's just like such an impossibility. Like it almost feels weird to have ever believed that was on the table, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But what I'm talking about in terms of thinking back then and during the time Trump entered the scene and all of that, and
sure, yeah,
all the way up to the time when Obama made that phone call, and yeah, and so I mean the Bernie movement is dead, and you know the left kind of needs to pick up the pieces to try to move forward, and a lot of us, you know, a lot of people from all factions of the left don't know what to do, and it's kind of sad. And I try to remain a believer because it's been part of my identity all these years. But I came to the conclusion that the duopoly needs to be fully dismantled. It can't even be a part-time Democrat anymore.
Right.
Yeah, and so. Like I mean, I don't care who wins in 2024. In a weird way, I don't care if it's Trump or Biden because we're going to get more of the same. With Biden, we're going to get more of the same. There's going to be no fundamental changes. With Trump, I don't know what's going to happen with Trump. That's you know, it's a big question mark. Will we revert back to that status quo or not? But I agree with your co-host, Russell, that Ron DeSantis ain't out of the picture yet.
Well, anything can happen at the convention, given the outcomes of these trials and things like that. I don't think it would be DeSantis if they were to switch him out for somebody at the convention, if he were to get convicted or if he were to go to jail or something like that. And look, these are all unknowns. They'd probably do what the Democrats might very well do, which is just pick someone else, just pick someone who wasn't running at all. That might be where they go. Who knows? The danger on Trump's part is that he will overplay his hand. I mean, the Republicans tend to overplay their hand from time to time. They certainly did that in 2022. They got way overconfident. They underestimated the extent to which the overturning of Roe versus Wade posed a threat to them. And therefore, they nominated a bunch of whack jobs who lost to the likes of very unimpressive people. I mean, John Fetterman being one of them. It's very, very difficult to think that guy could have beaten anyone else but Dr. Oz. But the Republicans got overconfident. They nominated Dr. Oz, and they lost. That happens all throughout the country. It happened in Arizona. It happened in Wisconsin. Well, not Wisconsin. But what was the other state? New Hampshire. There were a bunch of statewide races that were very, very winnable that they lost because they overplayed their hand. And I think there is a danger that Trump will do that too. He tends to go very, very hard, tends to dig in very, very hard against the forces that he feels are out to get him, focusing on retribution and revenge and all that stuff. And look, that stuff plays very well to the base, to his hardcore base. But when I was on the road in New Hampshire and I asked people online, not just at the Trump events, but at the Nikki Haley events, what are the number one issues for them? Why Trump? They say almost to a person, inflation, border. That's it. So if he runs a very sort of meat and potatoes campaign, just runs on jobs, inflation, border security, he's very likely to win because those are issues that I don't think he's particularly great on, obviously, but those are issues where Biden has completely punted and left the field wide open for someone else to take and run with. And so if he runs that kind of campaign, I think he's basically a lock. If he starts going down the road of, well, I'm going to start investigating all the people who investigated me, and this guy's a sleaze, and they're going to go in prison, that alienates normies. It just does. And normies have a lot of power at the ballot box. Normies vote in vastly disproportionate numbers. And so he goes into the race the obvious favorite, but he can certainly blow it. He can certainly fuck it up for himself.
Oh, I think there's a good possibility of that. 2022, what did it in? I actually think that had Roe versus Wade not been overturned, not that the Republicans would have a super majority in the House, but I think they would have had something a little bit larger than the razor thin, the razor thin majority they have. America might lean right in its Overton window, but there are certain things like I would say that reproductive rights and some things like that, they're not willing to see that thrown away. So,
well, much larger. I mean, they'd have won far more House seats, but they would have won far more governor's races and far more Senate races were it not for the overturning of Roe versus Wade. But on top of that, they took a lot of chances. Georgia, that was the other state. Herschel Walker, right? Dr. Oz, that guy Bolduc up in New Hampshire, right? They just got a little greedy. They took a lot of chances that they didn't have to take. And those candidates, I mean, Bolduc ended up losing by 8 or 9 points. The polls were way off in that race. But the other races were very, very close. So even with Roe versus Wade having turned on them, and even with these ridiculous candidates who they put up, in many cases, they still came very, very close to winning, which meant had they played it a little more conservatively, no pun intended, they'd have likely won anyway. They'd have likely won those races anyway. And the danger with Trump is that he will get too obsessed with the sort of interpersonal politics of who's on his shit list and who he's going to make pay, that will sort of overshadow the issues that the Republicans just have in their pocket, not because they're good on them, but because the Democrats have just completely handed those issues to them. I mean, this thing going on the southern border right now, we're going to cover this. We have a Patreon show later this evening. They are just completely leaving this open to Greg Abbott to basically do whatever the hell he wants. He has the razor wire on the border. Mm-hmm. Biden said, we're going to come in and take that down. They said, no, you're not. The Supreme Court says you have to take it down because this is the jurisdiction of the federal government, not the state of Texas. And Texas is saying, well, we're not taking it down. They can come in and take it down if they want. We'll meet them there. We'll bring our weapons, right? I mean, they're basically threatening a sort of civil war. And there's no price that they're going to pay for that politically because they hold all the cards. Most Americans understand that the border, however you feel about the border, is being horribly mismanaged. And so Democrats are saying we'll only agree to border security if you agree to fund Ukraine. Most Americans don't want Ukraine funded either. So that means there's no incentive for the Republicans or the Republican governors to make any kind of deal. Why would they? Oh, you'll shut down the border in exchange for Ukraine aid? Fuck you. We'll shut down the border ourselves. Fuck your Ukraine aid. Oh, you say we can't? All right. Well, come down here and do something about it. Come down here and do something about it and risk a civil war. Does Biden want to risk that on top of all the other problems he has? No. So I think at the end of the day, the federal government is just going to have to stand down. I don't see it happening any other way because the Republicans hold all the cards. And it's not that the Republicans have any great ideas. It's that the Democrats have just failed on every level, that they have no hand to play on any of these issues, to the point where even when the Republicans say, fuck the Supreme Court, we're keeping the border exactly the way we want it, come down here and make us change it. What is the response? They have no way to respond to that. They are completely paralyzed.
It would be nice to see the Democrats do that when the Republicans are the ones controlling policies and trying to impose their reactionary agenda, but the Democrats have no spine. On one hand, they don't have any spine, and on the other hand, they know how to overreach in a way that turns people off. And so,
all they had to do, sorry to cut you off, all they had to do to codify reproductive rights after Roe versus Wade was overturned was abolish the filibuster in the Senate. That's all they had to do. They had the votes to do that. Joe Manchin is not he didn't want to take that procedural step, but he's pro-choice. Kristen Sinema's pro-choice. All they had to do was say 50 votes plus the vice president as the tiebreaker. Boom. Boom. Reproductive rights guaranteed nationwide. They had 6 months to do that prior to the midterms. They didn't. They didn't because they probably knew that it was a good issue for them to run on. Mm-hmm. And they ran on it, and they won on it anyway. This is the other part of the problem, is that the Democratic voters don't hold them responsible for any of this, right? So why would the Democrats codify Roe versus Wade when they know now that they could run on this issue forever and ever, just like the Republicans knew they could run on the issue before Roe versus Wade was overturned, right?
Yep. And basically it comes down to this. Republicans are not the only one that punches left. The Democrats do too. And we can't get anything done because Democrats just don't take the left seriously, because a lot of people who try to fight the good fight inside the Democratic Party, they get shit on and they take it.
Well, I had my friend used to work for Andrew Yang. And so I actually had lunch with Andrew Yang once, and he wouldn't tell me who said this, but he said this publicly too. He didn't just say this to me, but he said he spoke with a certain senator. He wouldn't tell me who it was, I don't know. But the senator told him a problem unsolved is worth more than a problem solved. And it's absolutely true. And that's where the Roe versus Wade thing comes in. As long as that problem was unsolved, it was a political weapon for the right. Because vote for us this time, we'll load that court and we'll get this overturned. It was a problem unsolved, and it was very, very useful. Now the shoe is on the other foot. Now it's a problem unsolved on the left, and now Democrats every cycle vote for us, vote for us, vote for us. We'll stack that court. We'll get Dobbs overturned, right? So it just goes back and forth.
Absolutely. And it applies to the border. It applies to every issue under the table. And
well, absolutely.
We don't have
absolutely. Nice, I mean, the border, that's a great point, because now at the border, what is it? It's an unsolved problem that benefits the out party, right? Because now the GOP can say, well, we have to get in there to solve this border issue. And to the point where even if Biden offers them a deal, there's no incentive for them to take it, because it's worth more to them unsolved until November than it is solved.
there's an advantage to both parties with it being unsolved because for the same reason, you know, they like an issue to take advantage of, but also in some weird ways it actually stagnate wages too. And they're not going to do anything foreign policy wise to make everything fair for the people in Latin America, which is
Right.
totally another subject. But I want to talk about New Hampshire because you took a trip to New Hampshire, and so I'll let you mention a little bit about that, and I'll play that clip.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, we raised some money from our audience to do some on the ground reporting. And so we were going to do Iowa and New Hampshire, but then Russ got invited to host the Jimmy Dore show the week before the Iowa vote. So we had to nix Iowa. So I did New Hampshire. And then we're using the rest of the funds we raised to actually cover the Day X hearings in London for the Julian Assange case. And so that's what we got going on. That's our on the ground trip for next month. But I used some of the funds that we raised to go to New Hampshire. I did 2 days on the ground. I covered 5 different campaign stops, 2 from Nikki Haley, 1 from Donald Trump, 1 from Dean Phillips, and 1 from Marianne Williamson. And it was the first time I had ever done anything like that. I had never done sort of like on the ground journalism where you create a story from scratch, and it's fun. It was a different thing, in terms of just going out with nothing but a camera and a mic, interviewing people, getting a sense of why they were where they were, why they supported different candidates, what the issues were that were most important to them, and then formulating a thesis based on that. I didn't put it into a written piece, but I did a pretty long hour and 40-minute video, sort of roughly edited documentary of sorts that we showed on our live stream last week. But yeah, I went to 5 events. The Haley event that you're about to show is the second Nikki Haley event that I went to. The first one was the day prior, which was advertised as a meet and greet. It was a meet and greet with Nikki Haley at the Keene Country Club. And so I went to it thinking it was a meet and greet. Usually, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. When I see something listed as a meet and greet, I assume there's going to be some sort of question and answer, some sort of talk back with the audience, where I was going to ask her about her plans to raise the retirement age as she asks more and more for overseas funds and weapons for Ukraine. That was going to be a question that I posed to her. At the first event, though, despite being billed as a meet and greet, there was no such Q&A. There was no interaction. It was just basically a rally speech. She got done with her speech. She said, "Okay, thank you, New Hampshire." And then she took some pictures with some people in like the front row. I guess maybe that's why she called it a meet and greet, but that's not what I think when I think meet and greet. Anyway, the next day, I knew not to expect any kind of talk back. So I knew I was just going to have to do this sort of Jose Vega style, if you will. For those of you who don't know that name, we actually made a documentary about him that we're premiering this Sunday. But he's the one who goes around to different events and yells at people for warmongering and things like that. And so I had to do it that way because I knew there was not going to be any kind of question and answer session. And before I was going to go, because I had already heard her stump speech, so I already kind of had an idea of like where I'd want to jump in and make my point. But as you'll see in the video, this other kid beat me to it. He did a protest of his own, and then as they dragged him out, Nikki Haley said that she's grateful for protesters. So I thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to make her day and give her a second one.
Yeah, I guess we should go ahead and let me get that video out.
Sure.
Share it with everyone. So let me go ahead and find it. Is that it? Is that it? Is that it? Nope, that's not it. Okay, here we go. Give me a moment.
Sure. I think it cuts like a little over a minute.
Yeah, I don't have a producer. There we go. All right, let me do that.
There it is.
You are a climate criminal. Trump is a climate criminal. You are all aiding and abetting the destruction of our future.
You know what we all need to remember? is I'm grateful for protesters like that, because that's what my husband and military men and women sacrifice for us every day, to be able to have the power of our voice.
All right, well, good. Here's one more then. Here's one more, as long as you're happy.
No, we're not going to do that. So first
I thought
of
you're
all,
grateful for protesters, but you're not grateful? You're saying you're grateful for protesters.
Okay, let her talk. Get
out of here. Seniors should work till they're 80, right? Let's go. You're out. You want to raise the retirement age so seniors can work, so they're not in Ukraine to get the money. The mass murdering Nazis in Israel to get the money. I mean, she's like,
Well, watch yourself. Watch yourself. Watch
You
yourself.
were in Russia?
There you go.
You wouldn't live much longer.
That guy said, "Watch yourself." They were pulling me out. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know if the cop who was dragging me out kind of like gave up. He figured I was cooperating, because there was a guy dragging me out. There was a guy holding me from the back, walking me back. That's why I was just following his lead. And then all of a sudden, that grip lets go, and I stumble because I was being guided. And then the guy said, "Watch yourself." And I thought, what do you mean, watch yourself? You guys were pulling me back. You guys are pulling me back. What happened? What happened? I thought you were spotting me.
Well, I mean, she just wants to revisit post 9/11 America so damn bad. I mean, it's amazing how somebody who looks like Tulsi Gabbard ends up sounding like John Bolton.
Yeah.
Of course, he's not as Tulsi Gabbard is not the peacenik she used to be. So, but anyway, I just always noticed they resembled each other.
Well, it's funny. That second event, that was the second event I went to. This wasn't so much the case in the first event. I don't know the political demographics of New Hampshire all that well. Maybe there are more Republicans near Keene than there are. Where was this one? This was in Derry, so this was closer to Manchester. But a lot of people, almost all the people who I talked to on the line on the way in, were either non-affiliated or Democrat. That's why she did as well in New Hampshire as she did, because it's an open primary where a lot of Democrats and independents are free to vote in whatever primary they choose. And since there was no real primary to speak of on the Democratic side, a lot of independents and a lot of liberals switched over to vote in the Republican primary for Nikki Haley. I talked to a couple people on the line who said that, they are supporting Haley. They would vote for Haley over Biden, but they would vote for Biden over Trump if Trump were to become the nominee. I talked to a few people on the line who said that. I also saw on TV, I didn't encounter any of these people in my interviews, but I did see on TV there were a couple of people who took it a step further, who said that not only are they going to vote, not only would they vote for Haley over Trump in the primary, but if Haley were the nominee against Biden, they would vote for Biden over Haley. So basically, there were a lot of people who just voted for Haley in that primary just to stop Trump. People who wouldn't even vote for her, in November, were she the nominee. They're going to vote blue in November. So there was a large sort of never Trump contingent of independents and even Democrats who were able to vote for her in New Hampshire. Now, in South Carolina, that's not the case. South Carolina is a much more Republican state, and so she's going to have to rely much more on Republican voters to get her close to Trump, and that's not going to happen. And she said in an interview on one of the Sunday shows yesterday morning that she will have to exceed her numbers in New Hampshire in South Carolina in order to justify staying in the race, which basically signals she's going to be out by South Carolina. She will probably suspend her campaign either that night or the day after, which clears the field for Donald Trump. So by Super Tuesday, there will not even be any pretense of any sort of race. He will be the presumptive nominee past South Carolina, which puts you officially in general election season, absent any unforeseen events, absent a conviction, an imprisonment, and something could happen on the Democratic side. I mean, it just seems unreal to me that Biden is going to be on the ballot in November. I just can't visualize it. I can't visualize us getting 11 more months down the road and having this guy actually on the ballot up for another 4 years.
There's a part of me that said Biden will not. I mean, I may eat my words saying this, but I've always thought there's a a pretty good chance that Biden may not be campaigning. It might be they might try to find somebody like Gavin Newsom or someone like that, and which I think in some ways Gavin newsom is more of a corporate Democrat than Biden is, strangely enough, depending on what context and what issues. But on one hand, I mean, it's kind of a depressing election that we're going to have, no matter which Republican's going to get the nomination, and no matter what replacement candidate could be replacing Biden. It's really depressing how our country is headed.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And I think one of the things that makes me think that they're going to replace Biden is this Israel-Gaza issue, because I think in the Democrats' mind, they may feel like young voters and Arab voters are just too furious at Biden over this. And they might think that if they swap Joe Biden out for somebody who doesn't have the kind of baggage that he has on this issue, they may be more likely, meaning those young voters and those Arab voters might be more likely to sort of give them a pass on it. Will that work? It'll probably work to a certain extent, even though it shouldn't. But I can see some young people who are furious at Biden for funding this Israeli genocide. I can see them perhaps falling in line behind another Democrat who just wasn't around to do that. Now, should they? No. But, the beat I've been on since I started my show is that part of the reason why the Democratic Party has gone to shit is because the Democratic voters have gone to shit. There is no mass of people inside that party to actually lay down the law when their leaders fuck them over and over and over again. Whereas on the Republican side, there is. I mean, the Republican politicians didn't want to stop funding Ukraine. That was a situation where the base of the party made very, very clear to the leadership that they weren't going to stand for any more of this Ukraine funding. And what happened? It dried up. They can't get it through Congress, to the point where now Biden is even saying, I'll shut down the border for you guys if you give me the Ukraine funding. Nope, won't do it. That's the power that the Republican base exerts over its leadership. On the Democratic side, there's no such thing. There's no such dynamic. It's the complete opposite. Leadership just plays the base of that party for fools every single time, and they get away with it every single time. Now, this year might be a little different in that Biden just might be too damaged. In that case, though, Biden, being the old man that he is, they might come up with an excuse to swap him out. And if they do that and they put a guy like Newsom up there, their chances in November do increase. Is Newsom the underdog against Trump? Probably just because of the anger that's in the country right now. But Newsom would have a much better chance than Joe Biden. I don't think there's any way for Joe Biden to win. He's down now by an average of 4 points against Trump nationwide. And obviously we know that the Republicans can afford to lose the popular vote by 2 or 3 points and still win, right? So if the Republicans are up by 4 points in the nationwide popular vote, if the election were held today, it would be a landslide. You're looking at probably 350 votes for Trump when you add up all the states that he is poised to flip if the election were held right now. He would flip Michigan. He would flip probably Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. He would be well north of like 320 electoral votes.
Of course, there's also the flip side. According to the polls, that Trump has a lot of favorability right now. But I think that maybe, and I'm not talking somebody who's on Team Blue versus Team Red, but just somebody who's outside the two-party system observing. And I think that maybe some people may have second thoughts when it comes to Trump, because, whether you like him or not, he's not the he's a little out there. I mean, he is just totally nuts. I mean, objectively speaking. So I think that some people may think twice too, even though they have this sort of justify anger management toward Biden. And I think that maybe this time the third parties may play a weird role in this election that it didn't play in the past.
That's something that I had more hope for a few months ago than I do now. And look, this is a trend that always happens, right? I mean, it always happens where third parties poll higher a year out than they end up polling, as the vote draws near. But you had RFK doing pretty big numbers just a few months ago. His numbers are down in single digits. The whole Cornel West, Jill Stein debacle is just an embarrassment. Like, how do they both end up running against each other? You go from Jill Stein being his initial interim campaign manager for the Greens to him leaving the Greens, running independent, and now Jill Stein running as a Green. So now they're going to split whatever of that Green socialist vote there was. So they're both down in low single digits. Neither of them are even approaching 5 points at this point. And then, RFK, my guess is he could finish about 5.5 points. That's my guess. Because ultimately, I think people are just going to feel like the stakes are too high to vote against their guy. The shit libs who are left to actually believe that the future of this country depends on a Biden victory, they're not going to mess with a third party. And then on the other side of that, the people who see this country and this world being dragged to hell are going to vote for the candidate who has a chance to win. Like, I originally thought there would be enough despair and dissatisfaction across the board to create oxygen for the third parties, but the third party candidates have done a horrible job. I mean, Cornel West, Jill Stein have done an absolutely horrible job. How that fell apart is just unbelievable when you have this historic opportunity, because you're right. This year did pose a historic opportunity for third parties. I mean, truly historic in the sense that there's going to be two former presidents running against each other, two people who have already proven they've had the job and they failed at the job. That only happened once, one other time in the history of this country. It was like in the 1890s. I forget who it was, but somebody lost. What's that?
I think it was President Garfield.
Was it Garfield? It may have been Garfield. Somebody lost, and then they ran again 4 years later and they lost again. Could be. It was like 1890 something. I forget who it was. But yeah, this has only happened one other time. And so you had a historic opportunity for a third party to come in and say, listen, we've literally tried these guys both before. They're both failures. Look where we are. Let's try something different. But obviously Stein and Cornell couldn't make it happen. And then RFK just completely sabotaged himself with this insane Israel stance to the point where people who are looking for an alternative on the issue of the day don't have one in him. Like, he has positioned himself so horribly on that issue that people don't even see a point in voting for him, even to make a statement, because really, what statement are you making? Voting for the guy who just tells the most deranged and horrific lies about this horrible thing that we're seeing. Saying on shows, he says, well, the Israelis, they use door knockers. No, I'm sorry, not door knockers, roof knockers. A roof knocker is a non-explosive that they supposedly, according to RFK, fire on the homes of the people in Gaza to warn them that their house is going to be bombed in a few hours, and so they have to leave. Which, first of all, how kind of them, right? Second of all, they're not doing that now. They actually stopped doing that years ago.
I mean, it is objectively it's
just false. It's just a lie. He's just an unbelievable liar. So he's just totally screwed himself to the point where all the oxygen out of that campaign is gone from anybody who could have pushed him over the top.
Now, with Robert Kennedy, when his whole thing started, it started for defending on Twitter Roger Walters, who's a well-known anti-Zionist. And so he was worried, oh my God, they're going to think I'm an anti-Semite for defending Roger Walters. Nobody, I don't think that would have ever crossed anyone's mind except for his own mind. And if he would have just defended Roger Walters like he needed to, because it was bullshit why Roger Walters got in trouble in Berlin, nobody would have thought anything of it. Even they would assume he supported Israel, but they would have just been like, whatever. But
that was the other thing.
Bored.
Yeah, no, that was the other thing. That was the thing that was so disappointing about RFK. It was a real thing where he picked us up and then he dropped us. Because when he defended Roger Waters, we all assumed it was because he was cool on this issue, because they were attacking Roger Waters as an anti-Semite for criticizing Israel. And so when RFK came out and tweeted that thing in defense of him, we all assumed that he was based on this. And then, like, what was it? A day later, he comes out and says, actually, I take it back because I'm a bigger Zionist than anyone, even in our government. And I wasn't aware that Roger Waters was anti-Israel, and I think he's anti-Semitic for taking that stance. So it was just like this massive, like, we all got really excited that he said that, and then we were just had our faces slammed into the pavement when he took it back.
I mean, when you have people like Dennis Kucinich dropping out of his campaign, that tells you all you need to know about Robert Kennedy.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Robert Kennedy and just like, there are some areas I like Robert Kennedy. He's correct on Assange. He's correct on free speech overall, although he, after October 7th, he started to get wishy-washy on that issue. He talks about getting rid of the Espionage Act of 1917. And again, from a civil libertarian standpoint, not from where I stand personally on vax, I would say the voluntary part I'm for, but he came across as a little too nutty on the vax issue too.
Well, I mean, on that issue, I think actually the vaccine issue is far downstream of a lot of the COVID stuff. Like I read his book. I read his book, and I thought, and don't worry, I won't get your channel in any kind of hot water by saying the wrong thing. But the first 4 sections of the first chapter were all about how these alternative remedies were ignored in the early stages of the pandemic, and that all of that made a lot of sense, and all of that checked out. But just like on Israel, just like on most issues, don't forget, this guy's a lawyer. He's a celebrity lawyer. For everything he said that made sense after that, there was something he said that didn't check out, that didn't make sense. And I actually debunked some of that data on a live stream that we did on Rumble, not on YouTube. And so look, he's just not a reliable source of information or wisdom or judgment. It's not to say nothing he says is true. I think much of what he says is true. And I thought the first 100 pages of that book, if he just stopped there, I think he had a very, very well-argued book. Then he starts getting into stuff about HIV not causing AIDS, and then he says, well, I'm not saying HIV doesn't cause AIDS, but here's 2 chapters of supposed evidence why you should believe that, even though that's not my position. It's very lawyerly. And, a lot of things that lawyers say are well argued and true, and a lot of what they say is bullshit. That is deliberately spun. That is deliberately manipulative. That's why in that argument that he had with Crystal Ball, where he's talking about the roof knockers, she was prepared for that. She was prepared to say, actually, they don't do that anymore. But it's not easy to be prepped for that. Like, you have to know. The thing that makes it very hard to debate a guy like RFK is you never know what he's going to say, because half of what he says is true and half of it he just makes up. And you can't anticipate what somebody's going to make up. It's hard to debate a liar because you can only anticipate points that are true. Like, I can come and tell you right now that, whatever, my dog jumped off the roof and she was able to fly into a tree. You would never anticipate me saying that, right? Because it's ridiculous. It's impossible. And so you debate a guy like RFK, he brings up a nonsense point like that, and unless you are equipped with the facts to knock it down, he comes off looking good. And then when you check under the hood, you realize that a lot of what he says does not check out. And that's true across the board, And like I said, I thought there was a lot in his book that is valuable. But the problem with him and the problem with these egomaniac celebrity lawyers is that they don't know when to stop talking, and they dilute all of their good points with a bunch of nonsense. And that's what RFK does on several different issues.
Nonsense indeed, because now I look at him, I just think he's just a kook, a nutcase and all of that. And when you have Alex Jones speaking well, that's an alarm right there. I don't suffer from Alex Jones derangement syndrome. I think he's funny as hell. But that's as far as it goes. It's as far as it goes. I don't agree with hardly anything he says, but that's a red flag right there. If Alex Jones is speaking well of Robert Kennedy, I'm like, uh-oh.
Well, to me, it's just kind of delusional, and this is why I never took him seriously as an anti-war candidate, even when he was saying the right things on Ukraine.
He was.
His stance on Israel cancels that out to the point where I don't even know why you would be against the Ukraine war, because he's not only a hawkish Zionist, but I mean, that one speech that he gave right after October 7th, where he tried to implicate Iran and China and Venezuela. Like, if you're trying to start World War III, why not just go all the way? Like, why make an exception for Russia, Ukraine? Why not just before that? It doesn't seem like you're against World War III. It just seems like you're against starting it on the Eastern European front. But you're happy to start it on the Asian front. You're happy to start it on the South American front and on the Middle Eastern front. So I don't even understand on what basis you are a dissenter on Ukraine.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I went to Rage Against the War Machine last year.
Right.
And what was interesting with this Ukraine-Russian conflict was the two parties' approach toward it, because you have all the liberals and the progressives and the neocons in the Republican Party going along with the Democrats' war in the Ukraine, and then you had the hardcore Trumpies, and you had actually the hardcore left. I guess I would be considered hardcore left. Who's opposed to the conflict. But then when it came to China, there was a flip on both sides, and I'm like, don't both sides realize that Russia and China are on friendly terms with each other? So to oppose war in the Ukraine but be hawkish on China made no sense, and to be friendly with China and to put a Ukraine flag on your bio and say that Vladimir Putin is a piece of shit. I mean, the world doesn't make sense sometimes. That's just an example right there.
Yeah, like I said, I don't really understand it. I don't understand how he parses those issues. But what I do know is that he's pretty much blown it with, too many people who would have been very, very receptive to his message, because he is running to sort of save liberalism. That's how somebody once put it to me, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because on paper the guy is more or less a mainstream liberal. He's a dissenter on Ukraine. For what reason, I'm not really sure anymore, because he seems pro-war in every other way. And then he is a dissenter on COVID, much of which I think is well-founded. Not all of it, but much of it. Like I said, unfortunately, here in East Berlin, on fascist YouTube, I can't really get into that too much. But the point is, he is, for the most part, a pretty mainstream liberal. And there were a couple issues there where he had an opportunity to really distinguish himself from both major parties. And he's just failed to do that. He's failed to do that because his line on Israel is the worst of them all. I mean, he's worse than Trump. He's worse than Biden. He's the worst on this issue. And so what reason is there to vote for him? And so the third parties had a big opportunity this year, and they have totally blown it. And it's really a shame. The only one left to prove anything would be the Libertarians. And I don't know where the hell they are. They haven't even found a candidate yet. I don't even know what's going on there.
Well, I personally endorse the 4 left-wing candidates that I'm aware of, and don't know which one's going to be on the ballot in North Carolina. So,
well, that's because they fucked up. Well, this is what I'm talking about. Like I don't know if the Greens are on, or if the Greens haven't gotten their signatures yet. I know they were on 17 before Cornell left, but the fact that those efforts have been divided, that whole effort has been fractured, is going to make it very, very difficult for either of those candidates to get the ballot access they would need to pose any kind of threat, not even to win, but just to disrupt the system. I mean, Cornell was on in Alaska, now he's on in Oregon. He just put that out. So now he's on 2 state ballots. It's February already in a couple days. Like, you got to get on 40 in order for your candidacy to make any sense. He's on 2 with 10 months to go. I don't see this coming together. That's why I didn't see him quitting the Greens as making any kind of sense, because he was already on 17, including the 2 biggest ones, California and Texas. The Greens had that access locked down. In order to get ballot access in those 2 states, you need a combined 330,000 signatures. Now, 330,000 is what you need to be counted, which means you really need about 500,000, because anybody who's gathered signatures knows that the Democrats send in their lawyers to invalidate as many as possible. And if the address doesn't match the driver's license and the this and the that, like, they end up throwing out a lot of signatures. So now he's got to go get 500,000 signatures just for those 2 states alone. That work was done for him if he stayed a Green. And
Exactly.
so it just made no sense.
Peter
It made no
Dow.
sense. Yeah.
That's my conspiracy theory, and I'm sticking to it. I blame Peter Dow for this. I mean, that's my take, you know.
It certainly doesn't look good that he came in when the guy had ballot access in 17 states, and he left with 0.
And you know, the thing about it, it would have been better to stay with the People's Party than to go People's Party, Green, and then Independent. It was the smartest thing to do to go into the Green Party. And I think it was Chris Hedges that urged Cornel West to go with the Greens, and that would have been awesome, and all that. But unfortunately, I mean, you know, and I respect the hell out of Cornel West. Since I first heard of him 30 years ago, and so he gave me some hope for the first time since Bernie's let me down. And I've told people this: nobody's been longer in a Bernie cult than I have been. I mean, we're talking about going back to the early 1990s before everybody else heard of him. But Cornel West gave me some hope, and now I'm like, what the fuck in November?
Well, he brought to the third party effort what they needed and hadn't had, which was he brought some degree of star power, some cachet, some name ID. That's what you need if you're going to be competitive as a third party. You need a star. Cornel is not a superstar, but he is a star of sorts. He's well known in this space, which is why his candidacy was a major opportunity for the Greens to organize around. And that raises major questions. I mean, I've admired Cornel West my entire adult life, but it raises major questions that he just gave that platform up. He gave it up at the end of the day. I see somebody in the chat asking, is Dave Smith running for the Libertarians still? I don't think so. I don't think so. From what I've heard, he's not going to do it, which is a shame because he would have done very well. He's a very, very smart guy. He's a very likable guy. And yeah, like he is the kind of like everyman that people would have really resonated with, especially in a Trump versus Biden race. But I don't think he's going to do it. I don't know that for certain, but from what I've heard recently, it's looking like he's not going to.
Well, we'll see what's going to happen with this race in November and all of that. And well, let's hope that Nikki Haley does not have a realistic chance of getting into the White House, because right now between Biden, Haley, and Trump, she's probably the worst of the three.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, she's done. She's done. I mean, the other X factor that you have to think about is there's no labels. Like, what are they going to do? Because they're out there. They've raised a lot of money. And they're talking about running somebody. And so Dean Phillips has made some noise about running with them. Joe Manchin's made some noise about running with them. I don't think Haley would run with them because she's young, don't forget. Like, Haley probably figures the Republican Party is still her horse. She could run down the road. You know, she's only like 52. So, she's got a lot of years left to do a lot of damage to the world. I don't think she wants to blow her load by quitting the party, because once you quit the party, then you're fucked. They don't let you back in, right? And so I don't think she'll do that. But, you know, that could be a factor too. I think No Labels already has ballot access in Arizona, which is probably the most important swing state in the country. And so that's another X factor.
Yeah, and No Labels. I don't like that term, No Labels. It means I don't stand for anything except for being a polite member of the status quo. And
right.
So what they're going to do? They're going to have I don't know, Mitt Romney and a Republican like Mitt Romney and a Democrat like, I can't think of right. I'm trying to think of some bland Democrat right now. I can't think of it. You know, a bland Democrat and a bland Republican coming together singing Kumbaya.
Who was the Democrat they had in mind for that? Well, Joe Manchin, but he's truly a Democrat in name only. But I think Manchin was the guy they had in mind.
For that. I was thinking Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, who's an independent. You know,
right.
So, and that Senate race is going to be interesting in Arizona, since it's a three-way race. And I just hope, I don't want Carrie Lake winning, but if she wins, will she shut the hell up about that gubernatorial race in Arizona?
Yeah. Well, she could very well win because you basically have two Democrats running head to head against each other. I mean, not head to head against each other as part of a three-way, meaning with Lake in the mix. Like you're gonna have two candidates splitting the anti-Carrie Lake vote to the point where it's very conceivable she could win that with 40%.
Yeah, it is, and she's basically Tammy Faye Baker without the makeup. That's what she reminds me of.
Yeah, she does actually.
Yeah.
Good observation.
So anyway, do you have any final words here?
No, I think we covered everything. It was great to talk to you again, man. Good to see you. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And I want to say congratulations on Due Dissidence. I remember when y'all had like 2,000 followers on YouTube.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a big year for us. It's bittersweet because, we started attracting a lot of audience with our Israel Gaza coverage, and so it's kind of a bummer that it took a genocide for that's what gave us this major bounce in attention. It does sting that happened because obviously we'd give all those subscribers back if we could undo what's happening now in the world. And so it is bittersweet for that reason, but we're glad that people respond to what we have to say about it. Russell and I are two Jewish guys ourselves. That's why we felt especially responsible to speak about that issue the way we have. And it's resonated with people. I'm grateful for that, even though I'm obviously pretty disturbed at the context in which all this is happening.
Yeah, and we all want peace in that region, and it's a shame that calling for a ceasefire is considered an extremist position in this country.
Yeah, or now according to Nancy Pelosi, it makes you a Putin puppet. Did you see that?
Oh yes, yeah. I saw that. And that's another thing. If Trump wins in November, they're going to blame Cornel West. They're going to blame Jill Stein. They're going to blame the Libertarians. They're going to blame anybody that didn't vote for Joe Biden. Even Dean what's his name? Dean Phillips. Phillips, Marianne Williamson, RFK. They're all going to get blamed. And for old time measures, they'll be like, and the Bernie Bros from 10 years ago, also to blame, and Russia.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Russia, of course, that, and it's the same old playbook that they're going to have. And this time I'm ready for them when they do that, because in 2016, I got attacked online for voting for Jill Stein. How dare I supported Bernie? How dare I supported Jill Stein, against the mighty Hillary Clinton.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So anyway, well, listen, let's see. Let me say to everyone, you can follow Due Dissidence. Of course, I think everybody here follows Due Dissidence already. So, but I guess I'll bid farewell to everyone, and y'all take care. And I'll go and end this podcast right now.
Thanks.